mid-90s, I was kind of became a club kid for a little bit and kind of was DJing, and it became less about music and more about partying and getting high. And then I just kind of, casual selling weed to my friends and local kids and stuff like that. We would kind of hang out, and I was kind of the center of my clique of friends. And I lived in an Italian neighborhood, and one of the local older guys kind of noticed that I was, one of the louder, more center of attention kids. And he said to me, you'd be good at sales, and I work on Wall Street. He said, do you want to come work for me? I remember I was probably there a few months, and the feds, the federal agency that regulates us, the Exchange Commission, busted in the door, and we ran down the fire escape with, envelopes and files and stuff, and we were running from the feds as they came in the front door. And I'm like, I'm a kid, I have no idea what's going on. I'm 6 months into this thing, kind of learning the ropes of sales, and here I am running from the feds as they bust in the front door of the firm. And I was like, I thought I was leaving the streets and kind of, getting into a legitimate business, and it turns out I wasn't. I eventually started to work for a legitimate brokerage house, and a young guy that was probably younger than I am now. He was in his early 30s. This guy, Frankie, took me under his wing. He was a young guy, and he was a millionaire. For me, it was more living that lifestyle. That's why I worked there. And as his working hand in hand with him and kind of being more of his personal assistant allowed me to, go live in the Hamptons on the weekends with him and like a bunch of brokers. We would rent his big houses out, and then we would go party on the weekends with like Jay-Z and Puffy and Nas and all these famous rappers, and we were kind of living that lifestyle, and popping Cristal and all of that. And that was, I think, my first really look into that lifestyle of a baller. It was opened my eyes to another world that I had no idea had existed. I remember his friend kind of saw that when I wasn't at work, I was still hanging out in the neighborhood, and these guys were from my neighborhood as well. And his friend saw the way I kind of, was the central figure in my neighborhood. And he wanted me to leave Frank and come work for him and sell cocaine. And he promised me all kinds of money, and I told him no. I was really living in the world at this time and just kind of partying and meeting famous rappers and famous people in the Hamptons and, living this crazy lifestyle. And I really had forgotten all about God. Central to my story is the 7 times I almost died. The very first time I almost died, I was out in Frank's Jeep, and I was driving probably about 55 miles an hour. And I was rolling a joint, and I'm looking down, and I've got my knee on the steering wheel, and I'm flying along, and I look up. As I look up, I don't have my seatbelt on, and I had never hit the brakes. I went 55 miles an hour, maybe 60 miles an hour, straight into a tree. There is no way in the world I shouldn't have flew out the windshield and died. But I walked away from that thing barely with a scratch. By this time, I was probably about 21 years old. I had been working on Wall Street about three years. And I was kind of, I started to really take for granted this lifestyle that it was affording me. And I got bored with it. And I just, I was a young kid, I was stupid, and I stopped working there. And I kind of wanted to hang out and just kind of hang out on the block and get high and sell weed and hang out with my friends and drink and hang out in the park, and really had no direction of what I wanted to do with my life. And I almost killed a guy on a motorcycle, and he was in a local biker gang. And these guys, I was driving on the main block, and they kind of the main boulevard by my house, and they surrounded me on like 7 motorcycles. And I kind of was slowing down and speeding up to like give myself some room and kind of Somehow I shook them and made a right up a side street. And they didn't know who I was or where I was. They just knew my car. That night they had caught me and they were following me and they were chasing me up these side streets. And I could see them as I looked down the side street. I could see them pacing me. And as, I'm going up this hill, up these streets, and at each block, it levels off at the block. And I could look down the street and I would see the bikers. And I would, it was probably about 7 different blocks that heads up. And then it heads to these train tracks and I was forced to make a left. And where the bikers were kind of waiting at the light for me up ahead. And these guys had my friends that were at the store at the time, and they told me these bikers had the block cut off. And they had their bikes lined up in the street so I wouldn't have been able to get by. And they had chains and guns out, and who knows what they would have did to me. And, I drove my car down a side alley that they didn't know was there. And I came around them and I came out of the side alley with my lights off and kind of cruised past. And those guys were waiting for me, but they didn't catch me that night. And I never wound up seeing them again. And I just kind of felt that was probably the second time I really escaped with my life. And I just kind of felt the walls kind of start to close in on me, or it's closing in around me. And I knew that something had to change in my lifestyle, and I knew I couldn't just hang out on the block and this, this had to stop. Not soon thereafter, I just felt it, spiritually. I don't know what it was. I don't know how to put a name to it. I just felt in my spirit that the walls were closing in on me. Not too long after, I got arrested. And I got caught with probably half pound of weed, 30 hits of ecstasy, an open container of beer, and a marijuana blunt going. I was smoking it at a red light, and the cops whipped open my door, and they pulled us out of the car. Because there was people overdosing, one hit of ecstasy was equivalent to a manslaughter charge at that time, because there were so many people overdosing. So they basically had me on multiple counts of manslaughter, technically. I forget how many years I was looking at the case. It was at least 15 years or something crazy like that. I remember really not knowing what I was gonna do. What's crazy is my parents had no idea this ever happened. I mean, years later, you ask them about it, they had no idea this ever happened. And I just figured out, I got bailed out. The night I got pulled over, the guy sitting with me, his mom worked in the courthouse, and she got me bailed out on my own recognizance. So I was let go with no bail. It was just, there's no money to be put up, just show up at this time, and they let me go. And I went to the gangster from my neighborhood who actually had approached me probably a year earlier to come sell cocaine for him. And I told him that I needed a lawyer, and the lawyer was gonna cost me probably $20,000, and all I had was $2,000. And he said, "Don't worry, I'll talk to my lawyer." And, his lawyer took the case. And then over the next few months, while that court case, I don't know if you guys know how a court case works, but this, a court case can drag on for months. And this lawyer was a good lawyer, who's a mob lawyer. And he kept getting it pushed back. And in that time, I started to, I realized that I had to stop hanging out. I could continue to sell drugs. The cops knew who I was, So I started to go to school as I was battling this court case. I went to a 6-month program. It was just a computer programming certificate school. And this school happened to be not too far from Wall Street. It was actually across the street from the Twin Towers. And it was... I'll never forget this. It was September 10th, 2001. And I was in school, and they said they needed paperwork from my old high school. And I said, I don't have it. I have to go get it. And they said, sure, be back tomorrow. And I said, can you guys give me a day to kind of find this paperwork? And they said, sure. They said, be back on the 12th. And the one lady, she was like, no, you have to be back tomorrow. And I remember this one lady was like, no, give him a day. And thank God she gave me that day, because the next day that I was supposed to be there, when I was grabbing the paperwork, I had stopped by my old office to kind of say hi to some friends, and I saw the Twin Towers were on fire.
Yo, this is Ryan. Listen, on an airplane that's been hijacked, and things will go well. I'm looking good. Just want you to know, like, absolutely love you. I want you to do good. Go have a good time. Same to my parents and everybody. And I just totally love you. And I hope you win together. Bye, babe.
And that was September 11th. And that was the third time I almost died, because my school that I was signing into was across the street from the towers, and we would park our cars underneath in the tower parking lot in order to get to school. So I would park in the towers in order to walk to that school. So I would have been there that morning, but God just saw it fit to make a way for me to get out of there. And you know, in all these times that God was making a way for me and making a way for me out, I never saw his hand on my life. What's crazy though is he had me in his hands the whole time. But you don't realize this stuff when you're in it. So the school got destroyed by the towers collapse. So they had to move me to another one of their campuses, which is in Jersey. Not too long after we graduated, and I went out, partied with some friends, and I got drunk. You know, I was inebriated really, and I was driving in a rainy night that night, and there was a huge puddle, and I was going about 65 miles an hour. And my car hydroplaned. I mean, it hit the top of the water and hydroplaned skied into a tree at 65 miles an hour. No seatbelt on, completely inebriated, walked out of that car without a scratch. I was 23 years old at the time. And my parents told me that they had sold the house and they were moving to Nevada. And I was kind of up in the air whether or not I was going to go with them. My final day in court had come up. And the cops had caught me with an open container of alcohol. But they had so much drugs in the car that they were so excited that they took the open container of alcohol and they just threw it. And they were just like, who cares? I'll never forget that. So when the judge was asking them why they pulled me over, while they stopped me at a red light and just whipped the car doors open, this lawyer argued, why did you stop my client? And they said they didn't have the open container alcohol that they could have used. So they lied and said that the drugs were out on the dashboard of my car. And the lawyer said, you know, the lawyer took pictures of the car and showed them what kind of car I had, and the dashboard was sloped, so there was no way the drugs were there. So the cops got caught in a lie in court and it got thrown out. And before that local gangster ever got a chance to really confront me and tell me that I had to go work for him, I kind of knew that my time in New York at that point was coming to an end. So I moved with my parents to Vegas in 2002.